The alarm in the training chamber screamed before I even finished setting the resistance bar in her hands. That was not part of my plan. Nothing about that day was supposed to go the way it did. My name is Threx, and I have trained soldiers from a dozen worlds. I have watched grown warriors weep and beg for mercy after 60 seconds inside my endurance chamber. I have broken the pride of species twice my size. So when a human cadet named Nora Whitfield walked into my training bay, small and quiet compared to the others, I decided she would be my example for the day. I wanted every recruit watching to understand their limits before training even began. I told her to grip the bar and hold steady while I raised the pressure. She nodded once and said nothing. I liked that. Obedient, simple. This would be easy. The chamber hissed as gravity settings shifted, pressing down on her arms like invisible weights stacking one after another. I watched her knuckles for the tremble that always came first. It did not come. Her breathing slowed instead of speeding up. That was strange, but I told myself it meant nothing. 30 seconds passed, then a full minute. The room around us had gone quiet. Recruits from other worlds stood along the wall, watching with wide eyes, as the counter kept climbing higher than it ever had for their own tests. I increased the pressure again, expecting her grip to fail. Instead, she shifted her stance slightly, adjusting her balance like she already knew what I was about to do before I did it. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. 2 minutes passed. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed locked on mine, calm and steady, like she was studying me instead of struggling against the machine. I raised the intensity past the safety threshold meant for elite soldiers, a level I had never used on a new recruit before. Warning lights flickered across my control panel, but I ignored them. I needed to see where her limit was. 3 minutes. 4. The chamber's safety alarm began to blare, warning that continued exposure at this level could cause serious harm. I finally called out for her to stop. She released the bar slowly, flexed her fingers twice, and looked at me with an expression that held no anger, only quiet patience. "You said stop," she said. So I stopped. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. In all my years of training soldiers, I had never seen someone push that far without breaking. I dismissed the class early that day, telling myself I needed to review the readings from the chamber before continuing. In truth, I needed time to think about what I had just witnessed. That night, I pulled every file the Coalition had on human physiology. Most of it was theoretical, written by scientists who had never worked directly with a human recruit. I found notes describing something called willpower as a measurable trait among their kind, something that seemed to defy normal biological limits. I read about their history, how their species had survived ice ages, food shortages, and disasters that would have ended most civilizations, long before they ever built a ship capable of leaving their own world. The more I read, the more uneasy I became. I had trained her like every other recruit, assuming her limits would match theirs. I was wrong, and I needed to understand why before I made the same mistake with the rest of her cohort. The next morning, I called Nora into my office alone. I wanted answers, not another display of her strength. She sat across from me, calm as she had been the day before, waiting for me to speak first. "Explain something to me," I said. "Why did you not stop when the pain became too much?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because you never told me it would stop being worth it," she said. "Where I come from, we are taught to keep going until someone gives us a reason not to. Pain is just information. It tells you something is happening, not that you have to quit." Her answer stayed with me long after she left the room. I realized then that I had misunderstood something fundamental about her kind. It was not that pain did not affect her. It clearly did. It was that she had trained herself, or been trained somehow, to treat it as data rather than a command to surrender. Over the following weeks, I began adjusting my training methods, testing her limits more carefully, not to embarrass her, but to understand what her actual boundaries were. Each time, she pushed further than the last, and each time, I found myself recalculating everything I thought I knew about the Coalition's newest allies. During a joint exercise designed to simulate combat stress, another recruit, a young man named Elliot Marsh from her homeworld, collapsed under pressure that Nora handled without visible strain. I had assumed all humans would perform similarly, given what I had seen from her, but Elliot's failure reminded me that even among their own kind, differences existed. It was not simply that humans as a species had unlimited endurance. It was that some of them, through training or sheer determination, had learned to push past thresholds most species considered absolute. I began comparing notes with other sergeants across the training facility. Some reported similar experiences with their human recruits, describing moments where cadets exceeded expectations in ways that defied the standard evaluation charts we had used for decades. Others reported ordinary performance, cadets who struggled just as much as anyone else. The inconsistency puzzled me until I realized it mirrored patterns described in the historical records I had read, patterns showing that human resilience often depended heavily on individual mindset and circumstance rather than universal biological superiority. This realization changed how I approached the rest of my training program. Instead of applying a single standard test to measure a recruit's limits, I began tailoring evaluations to understand each individual's mental approach to challenge and discomfort. Nora's case had shown me that raw physical readings alone could not capture what made a soldier capable of pushing through extreme situations. During a later session, I asked her directly how she managed to remain so composed under intense pressure. She explained that where she came from, people were taught from a young age that giving up rarely solved anything, and that struggling through difficulty often revealed strength they did not know they had. Human resilience was not purely a biological trait passed down through generations, though their history certainly played a role. It was also deeply cultural, reinforced through the way many of their societies raised their children to view challenges. This combination of biology and mindset created soldiers who, under the right circumstances, could exceed expectations by a wide margin. As weeks turned into months, Nora became something of a benchmark within our training program, not because she represented an average human, but because she represented what was possible when natural resilience combined with deliberate mental discipline. Other instructors began requesting her participation in evaluations for new recruits, hoping to identify similar qualities in other candidates from different worlds. I found myself reconsidering my initial assumptions about her kind entirely. Where I had once seen an unimpressive newcomer to the Coalition Defense Fleet, I now recognized a soldier whose true strength lay not in physical dominance, but in an unwillingness to accept limits before fully testing them. It was a quality I had underestimated in every human recruit I had ever trained, and one I now understood I needed to evaluate far more carefully going forward. Toward the end of her training cycle, during a final evaluation meant to simulate crisis conditions aboard a damaged vessel, Nora was placed in a scenario requiring her to maintain composure while working through a series of increasingly difficult technical problems under simulated time pressure. Where other recruits from various worlds began making mistakes as the pressure increased, she remained methodical, working through each problem calmly despite the mounting difficulty. When the exercise ended, she approached me and asked whether her performance had met the standards required for active duty. I told her honestly that she had exceeded every benchmark we used to measure readiness, and that I intended to recommend her for advanced training reserved for our most capable recruits. She thanked me quietly, without any visible pride or excitement, simply accepting the news the same way she had accepted every challenge before it, as information to process rather than an achievement to celebrate. That evening, I submitted my final report to Coalition Command. In it, I described everything I had learned about human resilience, cautioning against applying uniform standards to their evaluation. I recommended that future training programs account for the significant variation among individual humans, while also acknowledging that when properly motivated, their capacity for endurance could exceed what our existing charts predicted by considerable margins. Command asked whether I believed humans represented a consistent advantage for the Coalition Defense Fleet. I told them the truth, that consistency was not the right way to think about it. What I had witnessed with Nora was not evidence that every human recruit would perform at the same level. It was evidence that under the right conditions, certain individuals among them could achieve results that challenged everything we thought we understood about physical and mental limits. I ended my report with a single recommendation that I believed captured everything I had learned. Any sergeant assigned to train human recruits should approach each individual without assumptions, testing their true limits carefully, rather than relying on standards designed for other species. The day I tried to make an example of Nora Whitfield, I had expected to demonstrate the limits of humanity to a room full of watching recruits. Instead, she taught me that I had no real understanding of where those limits actually were, and that perhaps, when it came to humans, the wisest approach was never assuming there was a limit at all.